Hi, welcome to the Ithihasa channel. Om Namah Shivaya, Om Nagendraya Namaha, Om Amme Narayana, Om Namo Bhagavate Vasudevaya, Om Anjanaya Namaha, Om Ganeshaya Namaha, Om Guruve Namaha. So today we do a recap. The reason for the recap is, since we started, we've been going forward and backward in time. And sometimes that creates a confusion to the people as to the actual sequence of events. But it's not going to be a boring recap, for I'm going to add a few anecdotes and a few interesting points along the way, which will keep you interesting, which I may not have spoken about earlier. So we started with Pandu and then went back. But in this recap, I'm going to go in sequential order, in chronological order. So we started with King Shantanu of Hastinapur, who was the son of Pratipa, who was 14th in line from Bharata, an avid hunter. Once he went hunting on the banks of the Ganga, and there he met the beautiful Ganga who came out of the river Janvi. He fell in love immediately because at some point in the past, in his past life, he was King Mahabhisha or Mahabhisheka. And as the king Mahabhisha, he used to go to Devaloka, Indra's court, Sudharma and Amravati very often, where one day he met Ganga and fell in love at first sight. And there was some impropriety at that point of time, because of which Indra got angry and cursed both Ganga and Mahabhisha to be born back on earth. At the same time, the Vasu brothers, 8 Vasu brothers, headed by Pitru and the youngest one being Diu or Prabhasa, were going around, and they saw in the sage Vashishta's ashrama the cow Nandini and her calf. And Prabhasa's wife, wanting the cow badly to give that milk, the milk of immortality of Nandini, to her mortal friend, instigated the brothers to steal the holy cow. And Vashishta in his anger cursed the Vasu brothers that they will be born back on earth and live mortal lives. These Vasu brothers were great beings who would flit through the skies in their spaceships, which were well described in the Mahabharata as beautiful chariots of the sky, which would go to different stars and planets across the Milky Way too. And so it was a match made in heaven, Ganga having to be born on earth to spend time on earth, not be born on earth, but spend time on earth, and the Vasu brothers having to be born on earth. And finally, this, as usually happens, the curses were diluted. The Vasu brothers were allowed to be born and to die immediately, just to satisfy the curse of Vashishta. But the last brother, who was the actual person who stole the cow, Prabhasa, he would have to spend an entire lifetime on earth. And Ganga would be there just enough time on earth to spend enough time on earth to ensure that the Vasu brothers would have a short life. And so Ganga met Shantanu on the banks of the Janvi. They fell in love, they got married, and Ganga put a condition to Shantanu that he should not question her. And by, she gave birth to 7 children whom she put back into the Ganga. And Shantanu looked on helplessly, and finally, when the last child was about to be cast, he came forth and stopped her. And Ganga said this last child was not destined to be cast. I shall take him, we shall call him Gangadatta or Devavrata. I shall take him to the heavens and have him trained. I am Ganga, and she told Shantanu about the curse. And she took Bheeshma, she took Devavrata up to Devaloka. And Devavrata was trained by Brihaspati, the king, the guru of the Devas, and his colleague in his father Angirasa's ashrama, Shukracharya. Both of them trained Devavrata in statecraft and politics. He was trained by Vashishta, by the great sage Vashishta, who was one of the Saptarishis in the Vedas and the Vedangas and the Shastras. And he was trained by none other than Parshurama, an avatar of Narayana, in the art of war. And as a fulfilled young strapping lad of 16, he was brought by Ganga to Shantanu and gifted back to him and said, "Let him rule the land of the Kurus, let him rule the kingdom of Hastinapur." And Devavrata did so for 4 years until Shantanu went hunting again and fell in love with the daughter of a fisherwoman called Satyavati. Now, Satyavati had a past history where she spent time with Parashara on an island on the Yamuna and had a child with him called Krishna Dvaipayana. Krishna because he was dark but handsome as Kamadeva. Dvaipayana because it was on the middle of the river. And Satyavati herself was a beautiful woman who initially smelled the smell of pungent fish, but with a blessing from Parashara, she was able to have the smell of the divine flowers, and she was soon to be called Satyavati. She was initially known as Kali or Matsyagandhi, and after she developed the smell of the divine flowers, she came to be known as Satyavati. Incidentally, Satyavati's birth was also very surprising. There was a king of Chedi called Uparichara Vasu, who once sent his seed to his wife. And on the way, the seed fell down onto the river and it was taken over by an apsara known as Adrika, who swallowed it and got pregnant with the children of Uparichara. So incidentally, Satyavati or Kali or Matsyagandhi as she was initially called was the biologic daughter of a king, a Kshatriya, and an apsara. No wonder she was gorgeously beautiful. No wonder she ruled the kingdom of Hastinapur like the queen mother. No wonder she was regal like a Kshatriya. It's only unfortunate that people only know of the birth that she had, which was Desharaja's daughter. Because when that Adrika gave birth, the fish Adrika gave birth to 2 children, a girl and a boy, and the boy became the king of Chedi and the girl remained as Kali, who became Desharaja's daughter. So henceforth she would always be known as the daughter of a fisherman, and she would be disparagingly called a fisherwoman by all the enemies of Hastinapura. So this Satyavati one day on the banks of the Yamuna was sitting twiddling her feet in the river when suddenly Shantanu came on his hunt, saw her, felt the beautiful smell and fell in love with her. But her father Desharaja refused to give her hand in marriage, saying that he wanted her children to be the kings of Hastinapur, and so he came back to Devavrata. And Devavrata realized the depression his father was undergoing, went back to the river Yamuna, banks of the river Yamuna, met Desharaja and acceded to all the conditions that Desharaja put, that he would never bear children, he would never marry, and he would never rule the Hastinapur kingdom. And because of this terrible vow, he was called Bheeshma, the one of the terrible vow. And then he brought his mother Satyavati, who was probably a few years younger than him. He brought his mother Satyavati back to the palace and she married Shantanu. And because she married Shantanu and she was a fisherwoman, the enemies of Hastinapura would always refer to her as a fisherwoman, and that the queen of Hastinapura was a fisherwoman. Though, as I mentioned, she was of royal descent, an apsara and a kshatriya, they knew that they could never take on Bheeshma in the war, and Bheeshma would always rule over the entire Bharat Varsha as the kingdom of Hastinapur. And the only thing that these people could do to put Bheeshma down was to gossip about him. And one of the gossips was the great kingdom of Hastinapur was ruled by a fisherwoman and the daughter of a fisherman. And the other gossip was that Bheeshma had castrated himself and taken off his manhood when he made the awful oath. Bheeshma hadn't castrated himself, but the rumor spread to denounce Bheeshma and to make him seem as less of a man. But Bheeshma's oath was primarily an oath of self-control, where he could bear children but he wouldn't. And with that oath that he wouldn't bear children, he came back to the kingdom of Hastinapur. There, Shantanu and Satyavati would barely come out of their rooms to rule the kingdom, and the entire responsibility of governing Hastinapur was left in Bhishma's able hands. So, without being the king, he ruled the kingdom. Bhishma was an astute man who was taught statecraft and how to rule a kingdom by Brihaspati and Shukracharya, the great Shukracharya, who we spoke about a couple of episodes back. And he brought that divine knowledge back to Bhuloka and Bharatvarsha. He would ensure that his army of spies would have every account of everything happening, from the distant edges of the kingdom to the inside walls of the palace. And using this knowledge, he would govern the kingdom of Hastinapur. Much later, after the Kurukshetra war, when he lay on a bed of arrows, Krishna, the Lord Krishna, insisted that Yudhishthira sit at the feet of Bhishma and learn everything that Bhishma had to know. And from the day the war ended till the day Bhishma gave up his life, every day Bhishma would instruct Yudhishthira about how to run the kingdom. For there was nobody ever who could know how to run the kingdom like Bhishma did. And at one point, when Satyavati and Shantanu had children, two boys, Chitrangada, the older one, and Vichitravirya, the younger one, Shantanu still refused to rule the kingdom and kept the responsibility on Bhishma's head, on Bhishma's broad shoulders. And Bhishma took care of those two children of Shantanu, his father's children and his mother's children, technically his younger brothers, but he brought them up like his own children because they were far younger to him. He brought them up like his very own children and showered all the love on them that he had in his heart. Not a hint of jealousy, not a hint of rage, not a hint of bitterness. And he trained Chitrangada to be a great king. And he trained Chitrangada all that he knew. And Chitrangada was a very versatile man and a very capable man. And one fine day, when Shantanu finally passed away, Chitrangada was crowned the crown prince, or not the crown prince, the prince of the king of Hastinapur. And Chitrangada, with Bhishma standing next to him, ruled over Hastinapur. But one day, when Bhishma had gone to the far reaches of Bharatvarsha to quell a rebellion, a Gandharva with the same name came to the gates of Hastinapur and challenged Chitrangada to a duel, or a trivial reason, saying that there can be no two Chitrangadas in Bharatvarsha. And obviously he couldn't let go his name, or you can call it a battle of the egos. And in that battle of the egos, Chitrangada, the son of Satyavati and Shantanu, was killed. And Bhishma, who till then had depended on Chitrangada to take over the Kuru kingdom, had to finally look to Vichitravirya to take over. Still a young boy, Vichitravirya was a very handsome boy, very capable boy, but not as valiant as his elder brother. And in due time, Bhishma went all over and taught Vichitravirya the entire art of leading the kingdom. Vichitravirya's name came from Vichitra as beautiful and Virya as virile strength. And then one day Satyavati told Bhishma that we have not been invited for the Swayamvar of the daughters of Kashi. And that was because the kings of the land of Bharatvarsha, who were vassal states to Hastinapur, poisoned the king of Kashi's mind and forced him not to call Hastinapur, disparagingly saying that the kingdom of Hastinapur was now ruled by a fisherwoman, and why would you marry your beautiful daughters to the son of a fisherwoman? And Bhishma couldn't take this insult, for his whole life was Hastinapur. Bhishma was the ideal king, a sannyasin king. He knew he had a long life, for when before his father died and when he had taken this brutal oath, his father blessed him that he would die only in the manner of his choosing, at the time of his choosing, and a place of his choosing. This oath would be, this blessing would be something which people would crave for long life. But for Bhishma, it was a burden, for he would see people he loved around him die far before him. And seeing people come and go around him had brought in a sense of strange vairagya in him, a strange sense of vairagya, dispassion, that he would have nothing affect him, for the flow of destiny would continue regardless of what Bhishma did. And the way Bhishma ruled Hastinapur and the beautiful Bharatvarsha was with this sense of vairagya, that sense that nothing will affect me. Let the flow of destiny happen as it is. And sometime in the future, people would accuse Bhishma of not standing up when there were wild things happening in the court of Hastinapur with relation to Duryodhana and the daughter-in-law Draupadi, Krishna, Draupadi. And Bhishma would be accused of keeping silent. But it was a man who had lived long years, knowing fully well that the march of destiny would take place irrespective of how much you put your foot in and how much you exert free will. The march of destiny always happens. And Bhishma has been judged through history for this. But he was stoic in this, and he knew that the march of destiny will go on. He had his oath, he had his dharma, and he had his greatness about him. And he would do his dharma to his very last day, till his very last breath, when he allowed his breath to stop for the very last time. And so it is to this Satyavati that it is to this Bhishma that Satyavati came and said, "Get the 3 daughters of Kashi for us." And like the obedient son that he was, Bhishma rushed to Kashi and brought the 3 queens, princesses of Kashi, Amba, Ambalika, and Ambika, back on his chariot. On the way, Shalva, king of Shalva, encountered him and tried to attack him with the intention of freeing Amba, for Amba was betrothed to him. But Bhishma vanquished him. And Amba on the chariot was feeling proud and happy that a great warrior like Bhishma, on whose stories these children, these princesses had been brought up, was finally taking her away for marriage. And she kept quiet and didn't tell Bhishma about Shalva. And that hurt Shalva, which is why Shalva refused to take Amba back. And when Bhishma brought the 3 sisters to Hastinapur and presented them to Vichitravirya and his mother, it was then that Amba realized that she was to marry Vichitravirya, which she didn't want to, because her heart had now gone to Bhishma. And she refused, saying she would go back to Shalva, but that didn't end well and she had to come back. And Vichitravirya married the other 2 daughters, Ambika and Ambalika, spent time with them. Bhishma had allowed Amba to stay in Hastinapur, and she did so for 6 years, following which she walked out into the nearby forest. And so when Amba left Hastinapur, she went to the ashrama of Saikavatya. She met her grandfather Hotravahana, who then told her that she should meet Parshurama, who can convince Bhishma, as Parshurama the Bhargava, was Bhishma's guru in the art of war. And it so happened that Parshurama's disciple Akritravarna had come to that ashram, and he gave news that Parshurama is due to come to the ashram any day. And true enough, Parshurama came to the ashram, and Amba recounted her story to Parshurama, after which Parshurama challenged Bhishma for a duel. An amazing duel ensued between them, which was seen by the gods, and the marvelous use of the astras, in which Bhishma invoked the Prasvapastra, for which Parshurama did not have an answer. It was a duel that threatened to destroy and crack up the earth, for at one point in the duel, both had invoked the Brahmastra. It was only Narada's beautiful Veena, beautiful tones from his Veena, that took them out of the trance and made them stop using the Brahmastra. And then again, it was the beautiful tones of the Veena also which made Bhishma, who was also in a trance at the time of invoking the Prasvapastra, which made him stop and take Prasvapastra back. But then, since Parshurama didn't have an answer for the Prasvapastra, he accepted defeat and apologized to Amba and said that he would be fighting for the very last time. And a victorious Bheeshma came back to Hastinapur, where within a year of this war, Vichitravirya died from galloping consumption, probably tuberculosis, leaving two widows who were childless, Ambika and Ambalika. In the meantime, Amba went into the forest and spent years doing penance, appeased the Lord Kartikeya, who gave her a garland of ever-fresh blue lotuses, following which she went searching for the man who would wear that garland of lotuses and kill Bhishma. And not finding one, she threw it on a pillar in the court of Drupada and went to Shiva. There on Kailasha, she met Shiva, who blessed her that she herself would be the one who would kill Bhishma in her next birth. And she would be born in the kingdom of Panchala, where the beautiful garland of blue lotuses awaits her. And so saying, she committed herself to fire. And Amba was no more. And Bhishma heard about all this through his spies. And then Narada told him how Amba would later be born as Shikandin in the court of Panchala. In the meantime, in the court of Hastinapur, the two widows of Vichitravirya, Ambika and Ambalika, were pining for their dead husband. And Satyavati, the queen mother, came and ordered Bhishma to have children with Ambika and Ambalika. And Bhishma, a shocked Bhishma, looked at his mother Satyavati and said, "You don't even begin to understand the oath that I have taken, for how could you?" Insinuating himself that Satyavati was a fisherwoman and would not know the ways of the Kshatriya and the great oath that he had taken. And I would never do this, and the world would the earth would lose its sweetness, water, its purity and wetness, and moon would lose its coolness, and the sun would lose its heat and life-giving warmth. But Bhishma would not stop and would not break his oath. And such was Bhishma, for that was the oath that he would live by. That was the dharma he would live by. And so Satyavati would recall that she had a son called Krishna Dvaipayana, who she had with the sage Parashar, and they called sage Krishna Dvaipayana over. And Krishna Dvaipayana spent time with the beautiful Ambika. But Ambika was scared and she was already depressed because of the death of her husband. And though the night was good for her, she spent it in mortal fear, for Veda Vyasa did not have time to purify himself, purely because of Satyavati's urgency. And though he was a handsome man like Kamadeva, he still looked bad that day, for having been on the peaks of the Himalayas, having extreme penance, sunburnt and dreadlocks on his head. He was not an ugly stench from him. He was not a sight to behold. It was a bad sight to behold. And so he was so horrible to look at that Ambika closed her eyes through the act. And the child would be born blind, but with the strength of 1,000 elephants, and that was Dhritarashtra, the elder son. A year later, when Dhritarashtra was born blind, Satyavati called back Veda Vyasa. Again in urgency, again he requested time to purify himself, but she said, "No, you have to have a child for Ambalika." And she warned Ambalika that whatever happens, don't close your eyes. And she kept her eyes open, but she turned white as a sheet, because she was scared. And the child who was born was Pandu, a child who was an albino child, but a brave and powerful king. And then Satyavati instructed Vedavyasa to have one more try with Ambika. But this time Ambika was having none of it, and she presented her maid in front of Vedavyasa. Now, the Mahabharata describes this maid as a Sudra woman. And we know today, in today's times, that using the word Shudra is not okay. But we have to understand, in the time 7,000 years ago, 5 to 7,000 years ago, in the Dwapara Yuga, the Varna system was based basically on talent and ability. And it was the streamlining of talent and ability which gave duties to people, and that was the Varna system. So if a person was the maid, it was because she was efficient in what she did. She was respected for what she did. And calling her Shudra was not an insult. It was just the Varna system at play at that point of time. And so Veda Vyasa had a third child in the Kuru family with this maid who was as beautiful as an Apsara and who treated him like he was a god. And it was said that Veda Vyasa almost fell in love with this woman and said that this woman would have a child who would be an Amsh of Dharma, Raja himself of Dharma, the god of truth. For Dharma at one point of time had a curse from the Rishi Mandavya who had cursed him for making him suffer an Ani because he was impaled by a spear called Ani, and hence following that he was called Ani Mandavya because that spear point remained in him. And Dharma justified that he suffered that way because he had impaled an ant when he was but a small child. And he had told Dharma that before a child turns 12 or 14, how can anything the child do be considered a dharma or a sin? And you have cursed me to suffer this way for a crime I have done in innocence as a child, and for this I curse you that an Amsha of you will be born on earth. And that child was born as Vidura, the third brother to Dhritarashtra and Pandu. And with this, Vedavyasa went back to the Himalayas and told Satyavati, who asked him to sire another child, and told Satyavati that this shall not happen again. Following this, Dhritarashtra, Pandu, and Vidura grew up. Inseparable, the three of them. They were taught by Bheeshma all over again, and Bheeshma had to teach the three of them about the art of ruling the country, about the art of war, and having to run and how to take care of the court and administer the court. Dhritarashtra, since he was blind, though he was the elder brother, was not given the role of the king. And the role of the king was passed on to Pandu, and Dhritarashtra was bypassed because he was blind. And in the times when Pandu would go on campaigns, Dhritarashtra would sit in his stead on the throne. But he was never king at that point of time. And Vidura was the able brother who both of them depended on to give sage advice when things got difficult, because he was an Amsha of Dharma and extremely knowledgeable. And though he was the son of a Shudra woman, he was treated equally like the brother and treated equally like a prince of the Kuru family. Pandu married Kunti first in a Swayamvara organized by Kunti's father, Kunti Bhoja. Kunti was actually Pritha by birth, born to Surasena of the Yadava clan. And Pritha had an elder brother called Vasudeva, who eventually became the father of the Lord Krishna, Vasudeva. And Pritha was given to Kunti Bhoja in adoption and took his name and became Kunti. When she was but a young girl, the sage Durvasa came to Kunti Bhoja's kingdom, and to ensure that Durvasa was taken care of well and the hospitality was perfect, Kunti was asked to take care of Durvasa, and Durvasa, satisfied and happy with Kunti's excellent hospitality, taught her a mantra with which she could call in the gods or the devas from Devaloka to sire a child for her. And Kunti, in her excitement, tried out the mantra in her room when she was but just past her puberty, and she called the great Surya. Surya came and ensured that she would be whole again after the child was born. But the child who was born, who was called Karna, was a child who was unwanted by Kunti. And Kunti wrapped the child in cloth and put in a wooden box and let it down the river, where he was taken up by a Suta charioteer and his wife Radha, and hence from then on called Vasusena or Radheya. Vasusena because Karna was born with an armor of gold and earrings of gold. He was born in wealth. And when they saw this child of wealth, they called him Vasusena, of wealth, the owner of wealth. And this armor and kundali, which the earrings which were put on, which this child was born with, was part of his skin and it made him invincible. And Surya took care of him from the heavens through his life. After this, Kunti got married on a Swayamvara to Pandu. And when Pandu came home with Kunti, she was his queen. And then at some point of time during one of the campaigns, Bhishma and Pandu had gone together and they had gone to invaded Madradesh, which was ruled by Shalya, not Shalva, Shalya. And Shalya had a beautiful sister called Madri, who was the princess of Madradesh. And Shalya decided to give his sister Madri to Pandu in marriage. Of course, a lot of gold was taken by Shalya in the process. Shalya was a very smart man, a very astute man, and as we see over time, a very cunning man. For him, fame, money, and luxuries meant more than blood relationships. That was Shalya, king of Madradesh. And so Pandu had two wives, Kunti and Madri, and after one of these campaigns, he went to the southern slopes of the Himalayas, where he would spend time with his wives on a honeymoon. It was time for Dhritarashtra also to get married, and Bhishma invited the king Subala of Gandhara Desha, Gandhara on the outskirts of Bharatvarsha, and his son Shakuni to come with their daughter Gandhari to Hastinapur to marry Dhritarashtra. And Gandhari was a pious Shiva Bhakt who, when she realized that her husband was blind from birth, decided that she would also not have any sight, and she covered her eyes with a piece of cloth, never to again open it except for once in the future, but never again to open it, never again to see. For her husband was also blind and she wanted to share the darkness with him. Vidura was also married to a beautiful woman with whom he had many children. This beautiful woman was actually the daughter of the king and the union of the king and a maidservant of a nearby kingdom. And Vidura's children also turned out to be extremely brilliant like their father. And so, with all three princes of the Kuru family being married, Bhishma again relaxed and let Pandu rule the kingdom. Pandu one day on his honeymoon with his wives kills the sage Kindama and his wife, who are in the form of a stag and a deer, and is cursed that he shall never have the pleasure of his wives ever in his life, and the day he does, he shall fall dead and the wife shall follow him to the afterlife. And Pandu realizes that he cannot be a king without having children and siring children, so he goes into the Shatashringa mountains while Dhritarashtra becomes king in Hastinapur. And as Pandu was not there, Dhritarashtra finally got his childhood dream of becoming king, since he was the older son nevertheless. And he ruled the kingdom of Hastinapur, where the grand old Bhishma again had to take over the entire task of ruling the kingdom in the name of Dhritarashtra. Pandu, in the meantime, decided to ask Kunti to bear children, first with Dharma and then with Vayu, two brilliant devas, who then gave them the two children, Yudhishthira and Bhima. And then he insisted that Kunti call in Indra, who would sire the child Arjuna. Meanwhile, in the palace in Hastinapur, Dhritarashtra was in a hurry to have a child before Pandu did. Gandhari had a blessing from Vyasa, and Vyasa himself had no clue why he gave the blessing. Gandhari had a blessing from Vyasa that she would have 100 children. But when the child was born at the end of a year, when she beat her stomach up on hearing the birth of Yudhishthira, she gave birth to a black putrid mass, which then Vyasa had to come back into Hastinapur and break into 101 pieces and put it into earthen pots. And there onwards, a year later, at the time of Bhimasena's birth, the second child of Pandu, were born the 101 children of Dhritarashtra and Gandhari. On that day, another child was born, Yuyutsu, who was also the child of Dhritarashtra, with a Vaishya woman with whom he went to show his anger against Gandhari. And so these children were born in the Kuru house. They were violent and ruthless and extremely evil, and these children took the name of the Kuru clan, hoping that taking the name of the Kuru clan would give them legitimacy, and they were the Kauravas, the 100 Kauravas led by their eldest brother Duryodhana. In the meantime, in the forest, since Kunti would not have more children and would not call more devas, Pandu insisted that Madri call a deva to have a child, and she called the Ashwini twins who gave her Nakula and Sahadeva. And soon one day, Pandu, in a moment of lack of self-control, hugged Madri and fell dead. And then Madri joined him on the funeral pyre, and she felt she was responsible for his death. And she felt that Kunti was a far better mother to the 5 children than she would ever be. And she joined Pandu in the afterlife, and Kunti brought the 5 children back to Hastinapur with some rishis and the remains of Pandu and Madri, which were then taken care of properly in Hastinapur. At that time, Veda Vyasa was called in to do the last rites for Pandu, who was his son from Ambalika. And at that time, he called in Satyavati, called in Amba and Ambalika, and told them that the times are not good for Hastinapur, and the sons of Dhritarashtra are evil, which Satyavati, Ambika and Ambalika are already come to know, and the sons of Dhritarashtra are evil. And there will once come a fight between the noble sons of Pandu and the evil sons of Dhritarashtra, and it will be a time which none of these women would want to see. And then taking leave of Bheeshma and dumping the responsibility of Hastinapur on Bheeshma and saying, "You have a long life, live the long life, take care of the kingdom." And Satyavati with Ambika and Ambalika walk off into the forest and do penance and give up their lives in their Vanaprasthan. And on the other side, we have spoken about how Shikandin was born as a woman to King Drupada of Panchala, and later with exchanging the gender with a yaksh in the forest, nearby forest called Stunakarna. The forest was not called Stunakarna, the yaksh was called Stunakarna. He exchanged her gender with Stunakarna and came back and impressed his father-in-law that he was a man, Hiranyavarman of the Dasaranakas. And so we reached to the point where the Kauravas and the Pandavas would cohabit in the kingdom of Hastinapur, which we shall continue the next time. Om Namah Shivaya, Om Nagendraya Namaha, Om Namo Bhagavate Vasudevaya, Om Ganeshaya Namaha, Om Anjanaya Namaha, Om Kuruya Namaha.